Members that the meeting will be recorded and would ask that members note that all mobile phones must be switched off as they interfere with the recording. And can I also remind members to declare where appropriate and interest through the meeting as we proceed. Apologies. I have received an apology from Trevor Lunn and also from Chris Hazard. Chris will be here, but he'll be late. Just a couple of items briefly in relation to the Chair's business. The OECD report. The Deputy Chair, along with Peter, attended the briefing from the OECD on its report and evaluation and assessment frameworks in Northern Ireland education system. The Department sought feedback on findings and recommendations in the report, and the committee is to be briefed on the report on the 19th of February. Daniel, do you want to make any comment?
Yeah, it is. You had all the great and the good from, except yourself, of course. So if something had happened, you'd have lost everybody. But it was a good mixture of people. What interested me was the emphasis that the Minister seemed to be putting on it, which meant that we should be taking the recommendations on board in whichever way we need to challenge them or agree with them. And I thought that's coming. What did also come all the way through it, I felt, was that the broad thing is we have, it seemed from them, the right things in place here, but that we weren't necessarily making use of them properly. I think that's a broad summary and everything, but anyway, I look forward to the report.
I got a sense from what I gathered up, following on from reports that I'd heard of it, it was more like OECD had turned into be cheerleaders for the department.
It could be that.
And that it was they become the Appreciation Society. Policies generally good, but we all know the reason why this has happened. The department many years ago listened to the first OECD reports, went away and said, well, if we put all these things in place that they say we need to do, then we're more likely to get a better outcome. The problem the department has is it makes an absolute hames of them when it starts to put them into practice. So there is an issue of policy and practice. And classic example, good policy, computer-based assessment, how they put it into practice, total and absolute disaster.
Absolutely.
Assessment, good policy, how do they put it into practice, total and absolute disaster. So I think there is the report, as we said before, I think is a good basis, huge amount of information, but it's unfortunate that OECD did ignore expanding on the issues that were raised with them in terms of teachers and how things actually work, how they implement policies. So, can I thank the Vice Chair for attending that, and I think that was useful. The workshop, the KES workshop, Education, Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Can I just remind members that as part of the Knowledge Exchange Seminar series, there is the event tomorrow in the Long Gallery at 1:30. The event includes 3 short talks relating to STEM issues. I'll make a few brief opening comments as Chair of the Committee and understand that the Chair of the DEL Committee will also close the proceedings, and I would encourage members, if at all possible, to attend. I appreciate it's a Thursday, it's a difficult day in terms of your own constituency business. The draft minutes of the 22nd are at pages 6 to 12. Approved. Thank you. Just one couple of items in relation to matters arising. At pages 14 to 37, you'll find for further information relating to the Committee's inquiry into the Education and Training Inspectorate. This includes a paper from the Assembly Research about parent councils in Scotland and a paper from the GTC-NI giving its response to the OECD report on assessment and evaluation frameworks, and including reference to baselining and measurement of value added by schools. I understand that that paper in relation to GTC-NI is being presented today to the department. But obviously when we come maybe to that, it would be useful for us to refer that paper to the department and ask them for their comments, because I think it is a very useful paper. I think it has the basis of agreements that would help to move things forward in a range of issues. I think GTC has given certainly some good, considerable thought to it. So my understanding is that is what may happen today. But are members also content that this information is published on the committee's webpage?
Chair, can I come in on,
yes,
on the parent councils? And it's an extremely good document, and again, it looks as if Scotland are doing things well. I wonder if we should put a letter to the department asking if they're going to take up any of the ideas and recommendations and take it forward.
Yep. Okay. Happy to do. Okay. The clerk has hoped also to include the GTC NI paper on its online survey on perceptions ETI of ETI, but they've advised that this paper is not yet available. It should be available in the coming weeks, and I would suggest that we would invite GTC NI to brief the committee on its survey at our meeting on the 26th of February. Agreed? And we could also then maybe expand that to the other papers that they've given us. We have a number of papers from the Assembly Research as part of the inquiry, and I would suggest that we would ask, James is with us in the public gallery this morning, research maybe to provide us with an oral briefing on the research papers at some stage. It really is bringing them all together and trying to get a sense of the information that we're getting out of them, and we'll schedule that in with research. Okay, thank you members for allowing us to get through that briefly, and we'll move on to the first item of our business, which is in relation to area planning and our advisor, Professor Tony Gallagher. You'll find the clerk's covering note at pages 39 to 41, and also two papers from Professor Tony Gallagher at pages 42 to 80. The first dealing with the post-primary sector, and the second with the primary sector, which we considered in April. Today's briefing will be recorded by Hansard, and we would welcome to the committee in 2014, I think for his first time, Professor Tony Gallagher. Tony, thank you again for all your work, and we appreciate the work and effort that you make in relation to this and many other elements of academia when it comes to trying to assess our educational system. We have your papers. I'm quite happy for you to speak to the papers, and then members will have questions.
Okay, thank you. You'll recall that on a previous occasion I prepared a paper looking at the data on primary schools. It became available through the whole area planning process, and you asked me to do a similar paper, a similar analysis looking at the post-primary data, so that's the paper that's been presented. So just to sort of quickly outline some of the themes, I suppose, in it. The paper provides a picture, a statistical picture of the numbers of schools and pupils by sector, type and their distribution across Northern Ireland, just to present a sort of an image of the system. It provides some information on the impact of fallen roles by looking at unfilled places in schools. It looks at the patterns of social disadvantage as measured by entitlement to free school meals and special proportion of pupils and special needs, and shows the way in which they link together a bit. And it looks at the information which was available through the area planning process around performance patterns and some of the issues that come up there. The rising pattern of performance among secondary schools, the ceiling effect almost for grammar schools when we use the 5 or more or 7 or more GCSEs. There's a number of other issues, and I think I highlight an issue about thinking about different ways of measuring performance to try to avoid some potentially perverse consequences of using criteria-based measures. Clearly, one of the key issues around the whole area, the drive behind the area planning process, was the identification of different forms of stress or challenge that schools were facing. And as with the primary schools, for the post-primary schools, there are a number of criteria based around attainment stress, enrolment stress and financial stress. And so take a look at the data on that, look at the distribution of schools that are identified as being under stress under these measures, and it does vary a bit. Quite a few of the schools are 44% are identified as being under enrolment stress for their Year 8 to Year 12 student group. 28% are identified as being under enrolment stress for their post-16 enrolments. And all the schools that are under stress on an enrolment basis tend to be schools outside the main urban areas or in rural areas, and that opens up a whole series of other issues around provision in rural areas. A little over a third of the schools are identified as being under financial stress in terms of the level of deficits that they are running, although the pattern of this varies quite widely across Northern Ireland, and it presents some information on that, just looking at some of the sort of the characteristics and the numbers around schools that are under financial stress. In relation to attainment stress, about a little under a third of grammar schools are identified as being under attainment stress in relation to the criterion on 7 or more GCSEs, and about a quarter of the secondary schools are identified as being under attainment stress using the 5 or more GCSEs or the criterion of 5 or more good GCSEs with English and Maths. Towards the end of the paper, as with the primary paper, I look at the relationship between some of the sort of stress factors and attainment patterns, in particular trying to see if there's any relationship between school size and patterns of performance, because in some senses that's one of the drivers behind the area planning process. And while the analysis suggests that there's a very slight tendency for small schools to be a little more likely to be under stress on these measures than larger schools, there's no statistically significant relationship which suggests that there's, on the basis of these data, that there's relatively little evidence of a relationship between school size and problems in relation to attainment or financial position. So that's a sort of a quick run through some of the main things of the paper.
Thanks, Tony. And the paper is very useful. And I think really if you take, and I'm sure you may have seen the paper that was presented to us last week from Colin Noakes in regards to some of these issues as well. Would the committee be right to come to the conclusion that a new approach to the whole process of area planning is needed, which is founded on community audit, community wishes? Because clearly, if you look at the trajectory that we have gone down in terms of this, the policy may be right in terms of the objectives that we want to achieve, but the vehicle that has been used, namely under the guise of area planning, has led to a procedure and a practice that hasn't delivered. And really all it has done is it has created more uncertainty rather than definitive outcomes, with the few exceptions. And they are very few in terms of the overall process. Is that a fair conclusion to come to? Or if this process is continued as it is, will it give what the outcomes were originally intended to be?
Yeah, I think Colin made this point last week, and I think it is a reasonable conclusion. Whenever the process was put in place originally, it was identified or cast as an attempt to look at area-based solutions. Though in practice, although there was a connection between the different sectors, the examination of the diagnosis of the situation was carried out in parallel tracks between the sectors, which didn't lead to a terribly joined up search for solutions. Since then, the policy environment has moved on, with more attention being given to shared education since that time, which just highlights the gulf between some of the sort of the notion of a broadly area-based solutions, or attempt to find area-based solutions, and the way sort of the direction of travel in policy. So I think it's not unreasonable to say that some aspects of the process perhaps need to be rethought.
And certainly something that came out, and we don't want to stray into that area, because later on we'll specifically look at the issue of shared education. We did stray into it last week with Colin, and obviously your own colleagues from the university. But one of the issues that I think is emerging more and more, and it was something that we alluded to earlier on in relation to even OECD, how that they have made very good comment in relation to all the policies, and that the policies seem to be the right policies that you would want to put in place to govern and to inform your educational system. Difficult it seems to be is that whenever they go to put them into practice, they either are ill thought out, ill prepared, ill funded, or they're not aligned. And you have shared education, you have signature projects, you have area planning. And area planning and shared education in most places don't seem to come together. And that is creating a real challenge and a real difficulty. In fact, in some cases, it's creating tensions within sectors. And I can go to areas in this city where there are real tensions within sectors, because area planning is saying, this is what we want to do. But the statistics are saying, you have a very good school here. Yeah. And the worry is, are we going to have to sacrifice a very good school because of a generic area plan? and it's how you marry those two things together.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing here is the potential clash between a top-down process and a bottom-up process. Because one of the things that's becoming very clear in a lot of discussions, particularly around the shared campuses notion, is discussions in different parts of Northern Ireland locally, where people are coming up with solutions that they think will work locally, but they're not necessarily fitting into the top-down solutions that are coming from the sectoral leaders. And I think we are seeing increasingly a clash between those two ways of addressing the situation.
How much of a deficit or a difficulty does it create for us, Tony, whenever the department indicated that it would revisit or update the viability audits in April? And if you look at the timescale since we had the commencement of this process, there was a huge issue and concern raised about the legitimacy of the viability audits in the first instance because of inaccuracies and all sorts of things that were said at that stage. Then the department said, well, by the 1st of April 2013, we would update the viability audits. We're now into 2014. We haven't seen the updated viability audits, but this process of area planning just continues to sort of trundle along, albeit at a snail's pace. But they're basing information, or they could be basing decisions on information that's not worth the paper that's written on.
Yeah, well, I mean, an education system is a dynamic system, is constantly moving forward and changing. Inevitably, at some point, you take a snapshot to try and understand what's best to do, but you need to be careful that decisions that are made you're not sort of stuck in sort of a particular place. But it's like anything that, in relation to your earlier question as well, a strategy is only as good as the implementation plan. And no matter how good a strategy is, if you don't have a proper implementation plan, then the strategy doesn't really help you at all. And there are all sorts of issues that are related to that, I think, in this process.
One other question, and we'll go to members. In terms of financial stress, and you highlight in the paper the financial stress in the controlled and voluntary grammars, and that they're more likely to be facing deficits in comparisons to grammars in the maintained sector. Why do you think that is the case?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I mean, clearly in secondary schools, there's issues around fallen roles. And that creates particular challenges and problems for schools. Secondary schools are more likely to have unfilled places and be under pressure because they're dealing with the consequences of fallen roles. But I'm honestly not sure what the particular reasons for in the controlled grammar schools. I'm not sure what
you had a very high-profile case there just recently where a school in one sector has decided that it wants to leave that particular managing arrangement and become a controlled school. Yeah. I always worry that the reason sometimes for that is that you're getting closer to the Paymaster General, and that there's a bigger chequebook in terms of, if you look at the controlled and the boards, they have been dishing out the money in many regards to many other areas, while the concept of being on your own is all very good and all very fine. But when you hit a crisis, it's always very good to know that there's an organisation that you can run to for cover and for hide and to hide. Yeah. And is that not part of the difficulty? Now, of course, some would say then that the answer to that is bring in ESA, but I wouldn't just be as convinced that ESA might give us the same outcome, because you're still dealing with process and procedure.
Yeah, I mean, education is one of the areas in which we spend an awful lot of money, and I suppose there's a long-term problem, I think, is that too much attention is focused on inputs in the system rather than outputs. So we keep spending money, and whenever there's a problem, often the suggested solution is more resources, when actually we should think a lot more carefully on what we spend our money on and whether it makes any difference. Because if we did that, that might allow us to spend money an awful lot more smartly and more effectively.
Very valid point. Danny?
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Tony. I spoke once in the Chamber about the fact that there seems to be no framework. So in every area, you've got schools that know they're under stress, but they don't know, and they've been told in some cases to look for someone to work with or amalgamate or join, but they don't know where they're going, and they want to carry on primarily educating. And do you feel that we actually we need the facilitators, but more importantly, we need to have a framework so they know where they're all trying to go, because sometimes it focuses, say, in Ballymena, but it leaves out the schools that are just outside it, or in Antrim, and this is no one actually knows where they're going.
Well, it goes back to that notion of this sort of difference between a top-down and a bottom-up approach. The approach of area planning seems to be very, very much sort of top-down and led by the sectors, with even some boards were better than others in terms of the level of consultation, but I'm not sure there was an awful lot of active facilitation of creative options in local areas, and that the Minister made it clear in his comments that he was looking for creative solutions and innovative solutions, but I don't get much of a sense that there was an awful lot of support or space provided for those sorts of innovative or creative solutions to be explored. Even in the consultation process, there was a variety of things put forward, a variety of views presented in relation to the consultation, but in some senses nothing much changed whenever the revised proposals came forward.
But people didn't seem to really understand where they were going. So when you come to a consultation, I think if you read through your papers, you'll see that the petitions govern a mass of the responses. Therefore, there's a whole lot of other people who didn't really understand where they're going.
I mean, if we genuinely wanted in local areas people to have an opportunity to look at creative and innovative solutions, then you need to create some space to allow that to happen. And I didn't get much of a sense that there was any real energy put into trying to create those spaces at all.
Thank you. If I could follow on to the viability, one of the stress measurements was exam results, and value added, as we always raise, isn't what was measured. And that seemed to be a central piece to the jigsaw that just isn't there, and what we should be focusing on.
Well, there's use of sort of value-added measures in Times in England, and they do give you some useful additional information, because they focus on the extra that a school brings to pupils of different kinds. Given the sort of the grammar secondary divide, I think there are particular problems and challenges around using value-added measures here, but they would add an extra layer to the information. I think one of the points that I make in the paper is that I think there's maybe a slightly bigger issue to look at, and if we use a criterion like 5 or more good GCSEs or 7 or more good GCSEs, one of the problems there is that there's an incentive, a perverse incentive on schools to focus on the kids who are just below that criterion level and sort of pull them over it. But there's a risk, and I'm not saying schools doing this, but there's a risk that the kids who are seen as not having a chance of reaching that criteria are sort of put to one side a little bit, because they aren't going to contribute to a school's league table position. If you use the measure, I think I suggest in the paper, look at something like a point system with points for different grades, and look at the top 8 GCSEs, perhaps making sure you include English and Maths in that, and use that as a measure, then that focuses attention on the performance of all pupils, and there's this incentive there is on schools to try and do something about raising the standards for everyone. And I think that's something that we should sort of think about, because the notion of using 5 good GCSEs as our base measure actually harks back to the 1960s, when in order to maintain your scholarship in a grammar school in the 1960s, you had to pass 4 or 5 O-levels. And we've continued to use that sort of criteria more for reasons of tradition rather than because it makes any sense. So maybe there's if we are rethinking some of these processes, there's an opportunity to rethink some of the ways in which we measure performance as well.
One last thing, Chairman. The other thing, I actually felt the use of the word stress unhelpful all the way through, because it immediately put every school under threat and under fear instead of...
There's no doubt one of the consequences of some of the stuff is to make a lot of schools feel quite intimidated. The language can be very important in that respect and have very negative consequences.
Thank you. Thanks.
It might be useful, Tony, to maybe give us an explanation maybe before we go to Sean, but table 13 of your paper, and you give us a very good breakdown of it if you're academic, because it goes into the attainment measures and how they apply to the grammars, and the enrolment measures over 2 and 5 fail to have a minimum of 500 pupils. Could you just in layman's terms tell us what, if you interpret table 13, what does it really mean in terms of the individual schools and how we look at the system?
Well, I suppose...
Page 54 for members, sorry, thank you.
I suppose I mean, the attainment measures there are based on a particular performance measure, but they also try to take into account performance over a number of years. And depending on whether it's 5 or 7 GCSEs you're looking at, it can be a period of 3 years or 2 years. There's a number of different things emerge from it. I mean, I think the fact that you get this sort of variation across the different measures is an indication of what is a feature of our system anyway, and that's a high degree of variability in circumstance and outcome across schools on no matter what way you look at it. We have a very sort of diverse system in that respect, and there are quite large sort of achievement gaps. And sort of different things. So that's one element of it. The fact that so many schools are identified as being under stress in relation to enrolment is a reflection of the very significant rural dimension to Northern Ireland, and the fact that so many of our schools are serving rural communities, and traditionally they have always been smaller. And there is a sort of there has always been I think a policy bias. Which assumes that because a school is small, therefore there must be something wrong with it. And I think if you actually examine the evidence, the evidence to that claim just doesn't stack up, by and large. I mean, a lot of these indicators they're indicators that are taken as points for the purposes of the area planning process. You could shift them around, you could change them. And you would get different results, but it does highlight sort of variability. One particular thing that does come through in this, there's quite an interesting difference for the secondary schools between the levels of performance of schools getting 5 more good GCSEs or 5 more good GCSEs with English and Maths. There's quite a gap there, and that's interesting because in the past 5 good GCSEs was the target, and clearly a lot of secondary schools did things to try and make sure they hit those targets. The 5 GCSEs plus English and Maths has come in more recently, and the fact there's a significant gap, I think, illustrates the consequences of setting people targets. It can get people to do things to hit a target that isn't necessarily sensible, because it may well be that the English and Maths provision for some pupils in secondary schools was sort of, again, not as strong as it might have been, given that they had a target to meet. And with this target in place, no doubt that will rise over time. But this is where we need to be careful about targets. Targets can cause people to do things. We want people to do good things, but sometimes it can lead to perverse consequences, and we need to guard against that.
Sean?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Tony. I'm quite excited by some of the things you say, particularly what you say, and you've mentioned to it, alluded to it there again, that smaller doesn't necessarily mean underachieving. And I think that's very, very important. Do you believe that if we were able to, the stress factor created by Mr. Bain on the department in setting post-primary at 500 and rural primary at 105, if we were able to strip that out and see where because at the end of the day, a good school is about high quality teaching and learning, it's about good leadership, it's about being financially viable. If we were able to separate the stress because you've got 95 as opposed to 105, or you've got 350 as opposed to 500. If we were able to strip this out, it might be able to see better in terms of the whole issue of this stress. And I suppose another very interesting point you make there too, you talked about strategy and implementation plan. Do you believe in terms of the strategy that the way the strategy was organised in terms of area-based planning, it actually inhibited thinking outside the box? What I'm really talking about there is particularly in rural areas, we had the CCMS work on their plan, with the board work on their plan and whatever else, and the way the strategy was organised actually inhibited having an implementation plan.
Okay, well, there's two issues. The first one is in relation to the Bain report. I think it was 2006, where that report identified viability levels based on enrolment. I assume that whenever that report was being put together, that advice was taken from the inspectorate, from their sense of the size the school needed to be in order to be able to provide a certain curricular mix that would be appropriate for pupils. Because one of the things which the Bain report did identify was the high degree of variability in access to opportunity in terms of curricular provision because of school size. But that advice came forward before the entitlement framework came in, and part of the rationale for the entitlement framework was that in a local area, schools collaborating together could provide access to a much wider range of curriculum opportunity than a single school could provide by itself. And that was another theme of the Bain report, the importance of collaboration in order to ensure that, as far as possible, every pupil in every part of Northern Ireland had access to as wide a range of curriculum as possible. The Bain report went on to suggest that another sort of collateral benefit of collaboration was a way of trying to engage across sectoral divisions and give young people opportunities to work together and to meet and to mix, and that was the sort of thing that led eventually to the shared education idea. If the entitlement framework had been in place, and if the imperative of the system had been towards collaboration, then it's possible that the advice on what a school needed to be able to do would have been different, and so the viability levels might have been lower. And that would certainly change a lot of the sort of game, but we're still working on some of that assumptions about schools being able to provide something autonomously, as opposed to being able to provide something in a collaborative context. So I think that's an important issue around the recommendations in the Bain report. They were put forward in a particular context, and I think the context has changed. The second point is around strategy and implementation, and yeah, I mean, it's the point that I made in response to the Chair's question. No matter how good a strategy, you have to have an implementation plan. And part of the difficulty with the range of initiatives that are being put in place by the department is that there's a whole range of things that don't seem to me to be terribly well joined up in terms of the implementation. So the idea of area-based planning was a really good idea. The idea of bringing all the sectors together to try and, because in the past one of the difficulties had been that if CCMS was looking at a map of schools to look at rationalisation, their map only had maintained schools on it. If the boards were looking at a map, they only had control schools on it. But the idea of area planning opened up the promise that they would all come together and look at a map that had every school on it and use that as part of the basis for their area planning. But in practice, the way it rolled out, that isn't how it appears to have occurred. They appear to have met, talked about what they wanted to do, gone back to the maps of their own schools, come up with ideas and brought their plans together. And where they thought they didn't have something that worked, then they started seeing how they might sort of stitch some things together. If they had taken a joined-up approach right from the start, I think we might have had a different outcome. That would have required the real encouragement and opportunity for people to explore creative solutions, and I don't think that was, by and large, was provided.
Chair, and then the other thing was completely ignored in that area planning too was the cross-border dimension.
Well, well, I'm not sure it was ignored because there was some work done by the department to try and get statistics on it, and I know in local areas there were people exploring options, and it's one of the things that I looked at for the committee. I had some conversations around that. I mean, I think there's some significant challenges around trying to find cross-border solutions because the structure and the curriculum of schools on each side of the border are different. And the conclusion I came to was that the simplest way of using cross-border solutions would be if pupils from one place opted to go to school in another jurisdiction and just follow whatever curriculum was provided there, and that could operate in both directions. But the possibility for trying to have a sort of a mix between schools on each side of the border was challenging because the structure of the schools was different and the curriculum that they offered was different, and so I think that would be difficult to put into practice, I think.
And I suppose, going back to the very first point, could you give us more information on that in terms of smaller schools doesn't necessarily mean underachieving?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a long history of claims, not just in Northern Ireland but in other places, about the problems which small schools face. And there's an equally long history that when people have done some research to try and test those claims, the claims normally don't stack up. Even whenever the statutory curriculum was introduced in 1988 in England, 1989 here, that was seen as the absolute problem, that small schools couldn't possibly deliver a statutory curriculum. Evidence in England suggested that, in fact, they delivered it better because the principals were teaching principals and so were better tuned into the challenges teachers were facing, and so were able to implement the statutory curriculum more effectively than in larger schools. So the notion that small equals poor is a long-standing policy prejudice, but there's very little evidence to support it, I think.
Thank you, because I think that's encouraging, particularly for small schools, because speak to Claire, and this is chair of Board of Gloucester Primary School, that is under 105, but not that far under 5, but meets all the other boxes. But when you get your report back from the department, you see this red box, and that it needs a bit of explanation. Thank you.
Is the case, Tony, not even more complex in terms of what you said there in relation to the two? You have the CCMS and you have the boards, and they had two different squares. You have the integrated, who it seemed to have a square all of their own, and you have voluntary grammars, who had another square all of their own. And when you came then to trying to look at area planning, it really was, well, we're all right, Jack. You could look at the school down the road, because really you don't need to come and look at us. And that was the fundamental problem. And the issue of managing authorities, and the issue of, and it's even more complicated when you get to look at within sectors. And if you look particularly within the maintained sector and the Catholic grammars, you have trustees who are making plans for schools that don't even live in the jurisdiction of Northern Ireland. Some of the trustees could be in France. Some of the trustees are in Dublin. And how you get to a point where you can then get an agreed position as to what is the best way forward for the school is very, very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into. I know there's all sorts of debates and issues around ESA, but part of the rationale for ESA was that there was seen to be a need. If we were going to move the education system forward in a positive way, there was a need to provide some sort of strategic sort of direction and strategic oversight of the whole system, because it's such a diverse system with so many different sort of governing bodies. Area planning seemed to open up the promise of trying to find more joined-up solutions. In practice, the level of joined-upness in it appears to have been relatively limited. And even the involvement of the sectors, it was sectors who had specific claims to ownership that were involved, but there was a wider variety of interests who had a role to play, and we know across the boards there were different ways in which engagement with those other interests took place, to a greater or lesser extent. So yeah, that remains a real challenge in the system. When we have such a diverse system, how can we plan it so that the needs and interests of every young person right across the entire system are sort of front and centre of our concerns?
Okay. Joanne?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your briefing, Tony. Tony, I've been asked by so many pupils, especially in my own constituency in Craigavon, and how they can get involved with the area planning process, because it's their school and their future, and they're the ones affected. I had a lovely girl from Lurgan College, Elizabeth Anderson, yesterday and Monday, and today she was in my constituency office shadowing me in Stormont, and she was quite aggrieved that it's their future and they would like a say on how decisions are made. How can Elizabeth and countless others get involved with the process? How can they make their voice heard?
Well, I mean, I guess the department will be running consultation processes at various points, and the boards and the sectors will be running consultations of various kinds, and it's. I mean, that's or through their MLAs. I mean, those are the mechanisms that exist. There are no mechanisms beyond that. I mean, that's. I think that's. To be honest, that's probably a question that really needs to be answered by someone else. We don't have, I mean, it is a recurrent point in this, we don't have very good mechanisms to bring together people in local areas to look at the overarching picture and the provision in the local area as a whole, and how that might be best organised. Yeah, and I think that's
and it's frustrating because she was so passionate about, I know, the Dixon plan, which, you know, my feelings on that. So is this something that you're picking up about, that pupils want to become more involved and they are concerned about the future? They're very, very clued up and concerned about the future implications of area planning. And I know pupil power certainly had a huge influence in Dundonald High School, the decision last week. So is this something you personally, you're picking up, that pupils want their say and they want to be involved?
I mean, I've never had any doubt at any point. I talked to pupils or students or parents that everyone is concerned about education. Every parent wants the best possible education for their child, because children are the future, and we all want to give our children a best future as possible. And educational qualifications are key to opening up opportunities. So everyone wants the system to be as well run and well structured and well organised, and give everyone the best possible experience. And I think there is a degree of frustration that there's so many debates and such a lack of consensus around educational issues, and there has been for such a long time. I think a lot of people find that very frustrating.
It is a major flaw. Their views aren't been heard. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
So just on that point of community audits, like on one hand, how can you explain pupil power being successful in relation to Dundonald, but being absolutely unsuccessful in relation to Newton Breda? You know, because if we place a lot of emphasis on on pupil power, well, there's one loser and one gained. So it's how you get a balance of what you see in relation to that power. And is there not a need for, and again you get straight into a really challenging area of community audit. Well, what community? Is it the community that's inside the books, which is in relation to the control sector? Is it the community in relation to the pupils and parents who are within the maintained sector? That would create a challenge, and we have to face up to the reality. There are parents who make choices, and they make those choices on the basis of the structures as they currently are. If you move to change those structures, you have to be sure that you've got the community to buy in to do that.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's just two immediate thoughts here. One is that the particular outcomes of particular sort of policy options and debates is probably all to do with the mysterious process of politics and influence. On the other hand, what complicates it is your point is exactly right about communities. If you look at schools in Northern Ireland and the communities that they serve, the communities are often very, very different, even geographically. The extent, where pupils come from for particular schools can vary enormously. So when you think about a community, it's not always a locally based community. Some schools draw pupils from very, very wide catchment areas, so their sense of community is different, I suspect, than schools that draw the pupils from the immediate vicinity of the school, and that complicates the decision about who are the community to be involved in decisions.
Although the mysterious issue in relation to the politics is more to do with the mysterious processes that take place when it goes inside the doors of Rathgale. Now, eventually, I think I'm getting in through the doors now after 6 years of trying to ask, because if you look at now, in fairness to the decision in regards to Belfast Corridor, there was a huge amount of information was put on the website, and you had graphs and a raft of information which informed the decision.
Yeah.
But it's the process then that was used to make the decision. Sure. And I think that's where the missed. It's the same as capital projects. I'm still a total absolute deficit in my understanding as to how the issue of capital allocations are made, because it keeps changing, and I still can't understand how you align and how you identify need in an area and who it is that ends up getting the money. And that's another debate that we're going to have very shortly in relation to capital allocations, because another announcement it will be due sometime shortly. So I think that if you look at how we carry on our processes, there's always a risk that the more transparent you become, the more suspicions that it raises. But Chris.
Thanks very much, Chair. You should have asked nicely. You might have got in earlier, Mr. Rathgale, but no, I only jest. But
they let you in too.
I was as pleasant as I always am in my invitations.
No, Tony, thanks for that. Apologies, I missed the start of your presentations. If you've covered this point, apologies. Just maybe to thresh out the idea of incentive for change. Is there enough incentive for communities to buy into area planning? It's very, very hard for communities, I think, to buy into a process where you're asking them to, fundamentally change how they view education in a town or a particular area. And I think sometimes it's, parents just want to send their kids to a good school. And very often, if there's a good school in the area, it's, no change here, please, thank you very much. Yeah. So I think there's an issue around incentive, and how we deal with that. What's the incentive for the sectors? What's the incentive for the schools themselves? So just maybe a little bit around incentive and what we maybe can do to help the process.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the problems in the area planning process was, and this is a point that was made earlier, the way in which it was cast, the whole language of stress factors and all the rest of it, what it did was to make people feel very defensive, because some people felt that their school was suddenly under attack, and the natural inclination, if parents send their child to a school and they think the school is quite a good school, their natural inclination is to try to defend the school. And I think this was quite predictable at the start of the process, that all over Northern Ireland there would be a whole range of campaigns to try and keep particular schools open because people wanted to retain their local school. And that discouraged people from having useful area-based conversations about what would be best for the area. I mean, the contrast, I suppose, might be seen in a slightly different context. Some work we did quite a few years ago now in Omagh, using a deliberative poll, where we took a sample of parents and asked them a series of questions about options for the future of education in Omagh on a range of different things, and put it down to very sort of concrete, not sort of abstract questions about the system in Northern Ireland or the system generally, but about schools in Omagh, and then brought them together to talk in facilitated groups about the different options. They had an opportunity to ask questions of sector leaders. It wasn't that the sector leaders came along and told them what they wanted. It was coming from the parents. They had the chance to put questions and then go back into the deliberative process and have their conversations, and then they were polled again to see if their views had changed. And one of the things that came through very, very strongly in that was exactly your point, that most parents are primarily interested in that their child gets a good quality education. And in some senses, they're much less concerned about having a full range of choice, or whether it's in this type of school or another type of school. That's less important than they get a reasonable guarantee that their child will have a good quality education. So I think parents will and can be flexible in terms of what local provision is, as long as they feel that it's going to work for their child. But there wasn't any real opportunity for that type of conversation, that type of deliberation to take place to inform the process. Too much of it was, this is what we think ought to be done, fill in this questionnaire, tell me what you think, and if in most cases any dissent from the sort of the form proposal wasn't really taken into account. And so there weren't incentives to provide opportunity, give people a feeling that they could actually play a role in helping to create or shape the future of the system. That incentive wasn't there.
Donald.
Just our final thing, Chair. Given all the points that we've sort of made today, particularly the last one on consultation, is it, in your opinion, that we should stop the whole area planning process and start again and really think our way through it?
Well, I mean, that's a big question. I'm not sure. I mean, I think that we are where we are. I think we've got to try and make the best of what we have. So, I mean, to draw a line or everything, say nothing that's been done so far is worthwhile. I think that's maybe too big. But I think, given the problems that have emerged, given the sort of challenges that are still there, maybe there's some aspects of this process that we really do need to rethink. And maybe one of them is trying to provide some real opportunity for parents and people on the ground to actually feel they have a real opportunity to be involved in this process and to come forward with ideas. I mean, one of the interesting things around the new scheme around the shared education campuses is that that's what's happening. The people in local areas are getting together and putting together proposals, and they're going to be submitting expressions of interest soon. And I hope that sort of generates sort of good momentum. But that's an example where it is possible to get these sorts of local dynamics going and allow people the space and opportunity to come up with creative solutions, because everyone has an interest in a good education system.
And I think the Omagh project, which was a very useful process that you went through in Omagh, there were different questions being asked.
Yeah.
The difficulty is an organisation, whether it's a managing authority, in the cases of the way our system is arranged, sets out a grandiose vision, but when it gets down to the individual school, the vision's lost, and it's about the individual school.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in my own constituency, where there may have been a great vision for what was the overall general outcome, but it all came down to the future of the school.
Yeah.
And that was what fed the responses, that's what organised the opposition, that's what galvanised the parents. So in a sense, it's not always, yes, parents want to have the right outcome, but they are also convinced that the best outcome is within the confines and the walls of a particular school.
But that's often because the way in which the issue is cast and is around exactly those issues. If you put it in a different context or address it in a different way, then maybe you'll get a different... Because our evidence suggests that parents are prepared to be flexible as long as they have confidence that the direction of travel is leading to better things.
Just one final question, Tony, in relation to figure 9 in your paper. And it's really for Danny's benefit, I'm asking this, as to why there's a greater financial stress in Southampton than there is in Northampton. And I may say that, and I see Upper Bands coming third as well, so at least Northampton's well out there. But it raises a question. If you were, and this is not to be disparaging, nor is it to be in any way to be derogatory to any parliamentary constituency, but if you looked at where you would think there would be the greatest amount of financial stress on the basis of the economics, that wouldn't be how you would plot out or how you would think the graph would end up.
Yeah.
You would have other constituencies that you would think would be further, having a higher percentage. Why do you think that graph is the way that it is?
It's similar to the answer earlier on. I don't know. What struck me as interesting about this, and the reason I included it, was because there's such a huge variation. And I think that's the most interesting point, just to illustrate that there's such a huge variation in experience across the system.
Like East Belfast ends up that it's not even registering on the graph.
Yeah.
It's not right.
Yeah.
Along with North Down.
Yeah,
Whereas there are huge issues in East Belfast in terms of financial challenge.
Sure.
But what is it? I just found that a very, very interesting graph as to where, if you take the Northern Ireland average and then see how it distributes,
Sure.
as you said, a vast variation.
I suspect if you were to drill down, looking at the different school types and management types, you would start to get some sort of sense of the explanation of some of these things. But even within all the sectors, there's degrees of variation as well. But that is a characteristic of our system, that the experience and the position of individual schools on almost any measure does vary an awful lot. And that's interesting, but it is actually, from a policy point of view, it creates interesting and huge challenges for the system, because if the schools are so diverse in terms of the circumstances, then to what extent is there a risk that the experience of our young people is also diverse and not necessarily in good ways?
Tony, thank you very much. Again, thank you for the paper. Very useful, very helpful, and we look forward to continue to work with you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, members, the committee will receive, as we know, a briefing from the Shared Education Project today, but also the department is to brief the committee on the 2nd of April on feedback from the primary area planning consultation. So that is due for the 2nd of April. Okay, there's nothing, I think we have that, we have the paper, so I think we should move then on to the area planning. The PI project, which is headed up by the North Eastern Education Library Board and the University of Ulster. Pages 82 to 89, we have a briefing paper from the board at pages 91 to 106, and a briefing paper from the University of Ulster at 106 to 108, along with all the other relevant papers, including the EU evaluation of the PI project. The North Eastern Education Library Board handbook on partnership working and notes from the committee's event on primary school area planning has also been included.
Members just want to take their ease for a minute, as I think we're missing one of our witnesses.
Okay, just take a ease for a minute or two.
Should we say 5 minutes, Chair?
Yes,
Should we take 5?
11 o'clock. Okay,
Okay, members.
Yep. for that. Can I welcome to the committee today Mr Ray Gilbert, Senior Education Officer at North Eastern Education Library Board, Jane Miller, Senior Education Officer at NELB, who will brief the committee, I believe, on the PI project, Dr Aidan Hunter, the Lead Evaluation Research at the University of Ulster, and Dr Alan Colley, Research Coordinator at the School of Education of the University of Ulster. You're all very welcome. Thank you for taking the time to come and see us. Ray, have you a few opening comments, and then other members will be able to make a contribution, then we'll have questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mervyn, and thank you, committee. We thank you for the opportunity to come this morning and share our experience through the PI project, and delighted to have our colleagues from the University of Ulster here in terms of the external evaluation of the project. Members have been provided with a paper, and I hope that you've had an opportunity to read some of the background, some of the experiences within that paper. I would simply like just to draw out a few things that I feel would like to draw attention to in terms of our experience of the project. I think firstly to say that in terms of the PI project, it sits and sat very much within the context of our vision within the North Eastern Education and Library Board and our previous working in cross-community work and cross-sectoral work, and it was very much bedded in that. Also, the context, obviously, while we're now moved on in time around both the Department of Education business plan objectives for shared education and also the Programme for Government targets for shared education, and we believe that our work within PI is very significantly tied into both of those. And certainly I would want to pay tribute to the work that went on through the PI project, which was led on a day-to-day basis by my colleague Jane Miller. I'll draw out firstly some of the things which we believe were unique features of PI, remembering a number of years ago when the project started. One of the key features that we felt contributed to the success of PI was the preliminary work and the ongoing work that was done between the different school authorities, and we had a steering group which involved all of the major school authorities working together to work through the processes of the PI project, and we felt that contributed significantly to the actual success of the project. I think one of the distinctive features of PI was the very local nature of it. We're very aware of a lot of work that's been done in schools over the years around community relations and different types of projects that have gone on. And in terms of the PI project, one of the very distinctive features we felt was that we were bringing together young people who lived in the same village, who met each other on the street, as opposed to linking with a school 20 miles up the road for activities once every so often. This was very much about the local community, and also with the particular focus not only on the young people, but also on broadening it out to the governors and to the parents. And certainly in terms of exemplifying that, I've attended a number of events, partnerships, and it was most heartening, I think, of a particular event I attended, a concert between two of our PI schools where the parents were together, the children were together, and in fact the young children of 6, 7 years of age singing their school song, which in fact was the partnership song, and it was very, very effective in terms of the relationships, and you could see how it had permeated the whole community. I think also another distinctive feature was our strategic decision to focus on small schools. Very often small schools will struggle to get involved in significant initiatives, and also the particular challenges faced by small schools, and the fact that PI was very much initially bedded in curriculum and in learning. And with the challenge of the revised curriculum and so on, we're very conscious in our broader role as a board in supporting our schools, particularly in small rural communities, to be able to provide the full range of educational experiences for young people. And there's no doubt the focus within PI on working together and on staff working together enhanced, we believe, the opportunities available for those young people. We also saw the effective use of technology. Of course, in a building relationships situation, face-to-face ongoing contact is very important, but we felt that the effective use of technology through video conferencing and other factors was very useful in that it kept the link going and helped to build the overall sustainability. In the latter part of the PI project, one of the most distinctive features was the concept of the shared teacher, and a teacher or teachers being appointed jointly between schools from different management authorities. We had quite a significant amount of work to do in terms of getting that on the ground, but certainly we saw a lot of benefit of that, having piloted it and then having extended it. The distinctive focus on building sustainability, and I suppose one of the most pleasing things from our point of view as a board, is that while the PI project in itself now, in terms of funding, is over, the relationships are not over, and the schools are still working very closely together, and many of those schools are looking at projects such as the Shared Education Project that's recently been announced as a way of maintaining and developing their links. I think finally, in terms of features that we felt worthy of drawing attention to, was the whole focus on staff development and staff working together. Again, the isolation of the small school, and we were very mindful of the fact that the curriculum in the small schools, quite rightly, is the curriculum that every other school is dealing with, but when you have 2 or 3 or 4 teachers trying to do all of that work, it's quite challenging. So the evidence that we saw in terms of teachers working together, and also the very distinctive work that was done with teachers, particularly in the early stages of the project, about developing relationships and working together and helping them build those partnerships, we felt was very important. Moving on then to some of the key learning which we felt emerged from the project, I think one of the most striking things that came through was the building of these very, very strong and sustainable partnerships, while at the same time maintaining the ethos of the school. And in many communities, that's very, very important. And in the broader picture of shared education, integrated education and so on, we're very mindful that different communities are in different places. And certainly one of the very clear things that came through here was the ability to build those relationships without sacrificing the original ethos of your school. And that wasn't done in any kind of protective way. It was simply acknowledging where we were at. And that worked very, very well. Another very important learning feature, I think, was that the schools chose to work together. It wasn't imposed upon them. It was drawn up from the desire of the school, which we helped and nurtured as we went forward. And as the project went through, we were growing the sustainability. We had a strategy to ensure that, and particularly around the building of relationships and counterdependencies, that the sustainability of the project was guaranteed. Through the PI project and the work of colleagues, one of the other very distinctive features was the development of resources. And one of the legacies of PI, there are now documents there charting the success of building partnerships that other schools can now use, and those hard copy resources are available on our website. Also, another very distinctive feature was the use of our in-house television network, and through NEELB TV, and again, if members wish to reference, there are a number of PI-related programmes on NEELB TV, which is an internet-based television service available worldwide, and again, some of the guidance materials and the journeys have been charted out in little small pocket 5, 7, 10-minute video pieces where people distinctively can get a sense of how to take this forward. The context of rural education we felt was very, very important, and the contribution through schools working together. And we talk within the documentation that you've received about the gradient of partnership, moving right through potentially even to federation. But that in the rural context, and as a board we have a very rural context in our area. I think the other key learning piece that we would want to draw attention to is the fact that at all times children, communities and education was at the centre, and that's very, very important. It benefits to children, young people and the broader communities. And finally, that, and again, the evaluation will speak in more detail, but we felt there were real tangible outcomes that could be seen and have been sustained. So certainly we had a very, very productive project in terms of PI. We're very grateful to our funders, IFI and Atlantic, and the most pleasing thing, I think, is the continued work that's being done by schools, despite the fact that the project has now formally completed.
Jane, do you want to make any comments, or do you want to?
Nothing further
You
at this stage.
I think what we will try and do is not refer to individual schools, because I think, and in the evaluation you refer to school A and B and C, while some of us, particularly in the North Eastern Board area, are well aware, and I'm involved with some of those schools, so I prefer not to identify the individual schools, but if we can talk in a general sense around the implications. We now face a situation of some of the PI schools, whereby shared teacher, for example, working well, I went out and saw some of the work they were doing in a community which has had challenges in the past. Buy-in from parents, buy-in from teachers, buy-in from governors. PI comes along, raises expectation, does a good job. Funding comes to an end, teacher gone, school back into doing what it has to do on both the two schools. But the department then comes along and says, shared education is a wonderful thing. It's a thing we all should be doing. The board goes, knocks on the door and says, now, have we any money that we could keep that teacher? No, sorry, no. It's only capital. It goes back to the point that we made earlier on. There is no alignment between the policies, the objectives and the practice. And I think I have to say, in terms of PI, it's a shame and disgrace that we now are in a place where PI has come financially to an end. Because I've seen the benefit of it. But the other point I want to ask is, which is a thing that I really, if I have missed it, I stand corrected. In the evaluation that was carried out, it evaluated parents, teachers, governors, schools. CCMS was CCMS ever asked about this evaluation of PI? And it's not recorded. Obviously, the board was the lead in it, so the board had a view. But I'm going to be very particular in this. We now have a situation in one school in particular where I think the two schools want to go in a certain direction, but the managing authorities, and I'll put it in that broad context, are saying, no, you have to go in another direction. And that other direction is a closer alignment with a school within their own jurisdiction as opposed to a shared provision. How do we unravel all of that in a way which is for the benefit of the community and the pupils and the parents who attend and support two particular schools?
If I could maybe pick up some aspects of that, and I'm conscious that when we hear about evaluation, there may be other points that come through. I suppose, in a sense, as I reported, one of the things we see on the ground is the ongoing sustainability of those relationships. Of course, and I would be very careful, obviously, not to make political points. There is an issue around policy making, but certainly I think the key thing really we would want to bring through is the learning from this process, and we would hope that that learning may potentially influence policy making, but we're very conscious that's something out of our hands. But certainly I'd want to emphasise the day-to-day and ongoing partnership relationships that are there, and again the success of the shared teacher, but obviously for others to decide how policies are aligned and how funding is distributed. But I accept the points you make, Mervyn.
Do you want to comment on the issue of evaluation?
Yes, please. Will I present our paper and then we'll answer some questions, or do you want me to answer some questions?
Yes,
first?
well, I'll do. Unless before we lose the train of thought, is there any other members want to ask specifically? Not that we will not go back to it, but if there's anything else coming out of that, Robin, do you?
Maybe it'll be covered in the next paper.
Right. Okay. Well, then what we'll do, we'll have the evaluation. Then we'll. Okay. Thank you.
I think some of the sentiments that you
Yes,
have expressed
okay.
will come out in this. So hopefully you've all received the paper. It was circulated prior to the meeting. To save time and to save your sanity, I'll not duplicate some of the points that Ray has already made about what PI is and what it attempted to do. I'll just express our evaluation and what we conducted in terms of research. We were the smaller research and evaluation project, and I think there was a larger project as well, and Jane can put you more in the picture about that. So what we attempted to do, as Mervyn has already expressed, was gather perceptions of the PI project from boards of governors, parents, pupils and principals and teachers. Also to explore staff understandings of what a partnership model is and what PI was about. To highlight examples of best practice and evolving practice with a view of transferability within the PI project and post the life of PI as well, so that that could inform other school settings and other partnerships and the educational debate that we're currently having. Also to assess the extent to which staff felt that they have created a shared space within their community and within their schools. To consider the sustainability of the project, and that's one of our main comments later. To explore the school's utilisation of shared teachers with relation to the logistical issues of how that was managed, and to examine the impact of shared teachers within those partnerships. So in terms of our findings then, I'm down to 1.0 here. Sharing in education. The PI project was successful in contributing to enriching and integrating education, and had a real and meaningful impact on the schools that it was involved with. The project enabled direct mixing and sharing through shared experiences and collaboration of pupils, teachers and principals, and offered a degree of flexibility in how schools interpreted that sharing, which was one of the strengths of the project. There was increased sharing, although obviously to a lesser degree, also between governors and parents and grandparents within these local communities, and brought these communities closer together. Sharing took many forms, such as shared activities, away days, residentials, shared classes and joint projects, which you would expect from this type of project. And they were very much shaped by the needs of the schools involved, and open to individual interpretation by the partnerships of what best met their needs. There was collaborative curriculum and professional development, and Ray has already mentioned that, and that was one of the strengths of the project, that staff in small rural primary schools that had a limited number of staff and a limited number of people working within a key stage or subject specialism had another professional with which they could consult and have professional development, curriculum development and resource development, and that fed into the quality of education that was provided then to the children, and that was a strength. Shared extracurricular activities such as joint productions, shared after-school clubs and activities also developed in the partnerships, and these fostered cross-community links and skills as well. So that brought the local community together. There was a spectrum of sharing, however, as you would expect, across the partnerships, with some engaging more fully than others in the shared activities and practices. In terms of the shared teacher model was innovative in itself in the broader Northern Ireland context, in facilitating liaison between Education and Library Board and CCMS, but we didn't specifically investigate CCMS's understanding or desire for that. That wasn't one of our remits. So that was the first communication between the Education and Library Board and CCMS in jointly appointing a shared teacher. So that was groundbreaking in itself. The implementation of the shared teacher model was negotiated and interpreted in different forms across the different partnerships, and different schools used these shared teachers in different ways, and to greater and lesser successfulness in furthering sharing in education. Where shared teaching was most effective, it was utilised in delivering shared classes where there was a two-school partnership that was geographically very close, where numbers of pupils were manageable in a shared and combined class. So where schools could physically get together, that was the best use of the shared teacher. Barriers to shared classes were obviously the cost of transport, and that's something that's to be highlighted within the rural setting, is that schools are often more isolated in the rural setting than they would be in an urban setting, where you can physically walk children from one school to another, which account for child protection issues within the rural setting. Barriers, furthermore, to shared classes were also the number of pupils. So in many rural primary schools, there isn't a large assembly hall where you can get twice as the number of children together in one room. And also the distance between schools. So when schools were geographically close, the partnership was stronger, and it was easier to facilitate shared teaching. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Alan McCulley, to explore our recommendations and issues of sustainability that Mervyn had raised earlier.
Okay, may I keep this very short? I want to emphasise the contribution the project made to enhancing professionalism amongst teachers, and in establishing very strong links between the principals. The principals particularly were clearly extremely important in providing the momentum for the project to go forward. again, to emphasise the enhancement to pupils' curriculum that came out of the project, and also to, unquestionably, the positive impact that it had on community relations. Ray mentioned not just pupils and teachers, but governors and parents and grandparents coming together. You know, comments like, "This is the first time that I've ever been in that church hall in a small village." I think those are very significant remarks. So there was, if you like, an increase in the shared space within those communities. I think we've got to, in going forward here, we've got to see this project within the shared education model rather than the integrated model. I mean, it was quite clear as we interviewed all participants, all those involved, that almost universally there was a recognition or an acceptance that this project existed within existing structures. And in many cases it was a way of preserving those structures, but also in developing stronger community links. So any remarks we make, I think, have to be made in that context. I'm not putting a value judgment in either of those perspectives, but I think we should be clear that this project was within the shared education, within existing structures, rather than those participating having a vision of a more integrated education system. And I suppose that has impact on sustainability. We did not have a remit to examine the financial aspects of partnership, but it would seem to us that the shared teacher has the potential to enhance curriculum and to contribute to two schools in a way that has potential saving of expenditure. But that doesn't get over the duplication that exists by there being two schools in relatively small communities. I think that the shared teacher has huge potential. I think in most cases it was used with great flexibility. I think there are dangers when you label someone the shared teacher and the person responsible for community relations, that others tend to back off and see that person as solely having responsibility for that work. And there was some indication of that, but nevertheless, it was quite clear that having someone from another community working in the school of the other was an experience which people felt enhanced the activities in the school.
Thank you. In terms of like, if you look at the, because we were talking earlier on about buy-in from parents and processes. Well, if you look at your chart, it tells us clearly that you had over 70% of people who agree or strongly agree with their child taking part in this project. Only 6% disagreed, and only 8% neither agreed nor disagreed. So, like, it's quite clear there was an overwhelming buy-in in terms of the parents. Whenever you then set that success against, for example, CRED, which is a policy of the departments, the Community Relations, Equality and Diversity policy, how and maybe this is not something that has been done, because obviously yourselves did the evaluation of a particular project, but how do you see something like CRED having to be amended or changed or altered that would make it more potentially successful in the way in which PI has been, as opposed to what's being achieved or proposed to be achieved in relation to the CRED policy?
I think the answer might lie in your opening comments, in the sense that the strength of this type of initiative is that it's coming bottom up. It's based within communities, and my experience of educational policy generally in the field of community relations is that it very often becomes a tick box exercise. It's about fulfilling certain obligations, whereas this, I think, had a very genuine bottom-up involvement. Because, as Ray was saying, it was obvious to all that the pupils themselves were benefiting and the teachers were benefiting through the professional engagement.
Do you see, and obviously you've set out your recommendations in terms of the evaluation, and one of them clearly is the funding allocated to rural schools takes account of the financial needs and the savings associated with partnership. I think that's an important one. But there was the other one in terms of continued funding for transport is necessary for ongoing pupil activities. In the light of, and here again, this is where this whole issue of alignment comes in. The department is now going off and we're doing a transport review. Here we go. The process is driven, excuse the pun, in transport, we would say, or I would say, by saving money. Okay? We've had PEDU, looked at transport. We have board transport. We have DE supporting and underpinning DRD by 45% and the amount of money it gives to it in terms of funding another arm of government. You have all of that. So the drive there is how do we get savings? But to achieve the success of PI, a key element of it was having to give funding for transport. So is that not just another example of how there is no alignment between what you want to do and how you actually do it? And from a managing authority's point of view, if you had a choice to make, right, in terms of saving money, you could save money by saying, well, look, that there's not necessary. Those schools can do what they need to do. Is this seen? If this is not seen as core, it'll be seen as the railway between Londonderry and Belfast originally by the department as non-core, and there'll be somebody come along at some stage and want to take it away. Is that the real risk and the real dilemma that we currently face?
I think it's a very, needless to say, a very complex issue, because sitting around all of this are a range of policies. Reference was made to the broader policy of area-based planning and the issue around two small schools in close proximity in the same small village and the issue of that. The broader transport issues, yes, are critically important as well. And to my mind, and in terms of influencing policy, and again, it's been alluded to in the evaluation, how positive people were about the sharing. And I think there's a need to perhaps get a little bit deeper analysis done around that, because as I alluded to earlier, one of the things that I would see very much on the ground is that the concept, and again I'm delighted that Alan has drawn it out, the concept of building success on a bottom-up model is a very powerful model, because it's not an imposition on anyone, but the consequences of building it on a bottom-up model is that you have to start from where people are at. And I do believe that there are, and I pay due tribute to all those who are working in every way around bringing communities together. But there is a spectrum there. In some places in Northern Ireland, a fully integrated model is a very good model. In other places, I think this model where we come together while maintaining our own ethos and identity, and that brings into the issue then of facilitating that to happen. But the core piece for me around all of that is starting from where we are at and recognising and taking forward this aspect of shared education of communities and children, building for the future by working together. Seems to me that what we should be learning here is about the success and building on the success and supporting that in whatever way we can. The difficulty in policy terms, of course, is that is multifaceted and multicoloured almost as you go across the various areas in the province, and it's very hard to strike policy. I understand and appreciate that is policy at a general level, but then has to be locally interpreted. So it's that dilemma, sitting with the wider transport review dilemma, sitting with the wider area-based planning dilemma, sitting within the broader and total context of the most effective use of public funding, which is obviously becoming more and more scarce, to the benefit of young people. And I keep coming back to that core point. One of the great successes here, at the core of it was and is the working together of young people. And again, I don't apologise for referring again to events that I've attended where young people standing beside each other from different communities didn't actually know they're from different communities. They were young people working together and doing things together. And one of the lovely things that's come out of this, as has been alluded to, is the concept of people who live almost cheek by jowl in communities, but who didn't know each other because they're in different parts, coming together and working together. And I suppose the bigger policy issue, Mervyn, is around the shared education policy, as Alan has alluded to, and how we pragmatically take that forward to get success. But that isn't easy in policy terms because it's so multicoloured and multifaceted.
I think, what that's borne out in terms of, and I'll go to Danny for questions, but obviously 2 of the schools are in one of them, my old primary school. The other primary school in the village that I was brought up in, I never stood in that primary school until I was an election candidate and it was used as a polling station. And the second time I stood in it was when I was chair of the Education Committee. I think that is a sad indictment because, and that community sits in many respects divided. I think, and the same did happen, that there were parents who never were in Armoy Primary until this project, and this project has ignited in that village a creation of something which is completely different than we've ever had before. It's made a very, very good contribution, and I'm just very concerned that it's not going to be built on. Danny?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much. And can I congratulate you all on, because I think it's a phenomenally important exercise and one that we need to see not just carrying on but expanding and being part of everything. But within that, we were probably listening to those of you who are outside of the area planning debate, and the Northern Board, Ray, have been much further ahead in the area planning, and I imagine certain aspects would have hindered the sharing and others would have helped. I just wondered what sort of key lessons that you've been able to pull together from this to help with the area planning and the board.
I think, not to repeat all the learning that I've already alluded to, but obviously seeing that in a wider strategic context. I mean, one of the things that we engaged in as a North Eastern Board in the run-in to area-based planning, and we are at the point at the moment, obviously, of firming up on our first iteration of the formal primary plan by the end of February. But we engaged with governors and with schools prior to our drawing together of the draft plan, and out of that emerged in different ways, including reflections of the PIE process, schools voluntarily coming together and saying, we want to work together. And that, again, is different in different places, and again, the whole rural context. But I think we have to be influenced, but again, stressing the kind of ownership aspect of all of this. Where schools are coming forward and saying, I have 2 schools coming to see me, 2 PIE schools coming to see me next Friday, in an area planning context and in the context of the recent announcement from OFM DFM on shared campuses. That has grown out of the success of the engagement here, and that kind of bottom-up growth, influencing area-based planning, I think has the best chance of success. But it is complex and it does take time, and these things, well, if you get a quick solution, it's rarely a solution that everyone buys into. People have to travel a journey, and we think PIE has helped them travel that journey.
If you follow on from that, you were talking about the shared teacher being absolutely key. When we had the stakeholders event here, we were being asked by lots of people to have a facilitator, someone that really understood how you pulled the 2 schools together. And I wondered if in those 2 separate but actually similar in certain ways, there isn't something that we should all be learning from. We need someone there who really understands it, who helps pull the schools together and sell the project.
Maybe ask my colleague Jane, who was involved very deeply with the shared teacher, to comment on that aspect of shared teaching.
I think certainly it's important to stress that it's not something that just will happen without that facilitation that you've highlighted. But certainly one of the legacy items of PI has been to provide those resources that Ray referred to earlier. There literally is a handbook there that other schools who are interested in developing partnerships with neighbouring schools can pick up and can use the learning from PI in their own context.
Well, thank you.
Also, we should advocate that the shared teacher is well informed of their role, and that there's a strict code of conduct provided there, as different schools did take different interpretations of how a shared teacher should be used. And quite often the shared teachers that were appointed were young, newly qualified shared teachers. So in terms of that being a broker as such, I'm not sure if they would be fully qualified. I think we would advocate more that good community relations training was provided for in-service teachers, and that would be important in developing that partnership, rather than just being handed over to the shared teacher again to do.
Thank you.
Chris?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much. It was a very thought-provoking presentation indeed. Alan, some of the words you were talking about, I think, are very pertinent indeed, around the idea that, you know, despite perhaps some of the musings of influential people in the media and everything else who maybe sing constantly about integrated education, here we have an example. I have nothing against integrated education, but here we have an example of participants, teachers, parents, everybody involved, overwhelmingly saying that it's not an integrated setting they want, it's this shared experience that has happened. I presume one influential Belfast paper won't cover this story overly well, but I think it deserves to be covered. I think it's a great other side to the coin in the whole debate around it. I just wonder maybe why you think this is. Why do participants, you know, have this feeling that, you know, is this shared platform that they preferred, not the transformed integrated setting?
I think that there's both pluses and minuses to that. As Ray has indicated, this project, I suppose, started where people were at. Then the next question is, how far can it take them forward? And it has obviously taken them forward in terms of personal and group relationships. The project was perhaps less strong in addressing difference between people, although I think in its later stages, you know, having built those relationships, the potential was there, and they were beginning to tease that out. The next question is, how far will those who are engaged in the project be prepared to go in those sorts of directions? So I think shared education has both, the glass half full is that it builds these relationships. The glass half empty might be the possibility that people will go so far and no further because they are not prepared to come out of their comfort zones. You know, and again, no value. I'm not putting any value judgments in those, but I think that's the sort of policy dilemma we're highlighting at this stage.
On the issue then, and indeed, you know, the papers, and you've spoken today about the positive impacts upon the wider community and the societal dynamics. Can I ask specifically about educational dynamics, in that, do you see an improvement in attainment? Do you know, specifically around education and not the wider community aspects of this project?
In terms of enhancing education, certainly the external evaluations have emphasised that the project was successful in that respect. In terms of subject areas for PI, what we initially asked schools to focus on were the areas of the arts, the world around us, and PDMU. Now, those aspects of the curriculum aren't measured in the same way that literacy and numeracy are. So we don't have that quantitative data in relation to literacy and numeracy. Those weren't the key subject areas. But again, in terms of recognising that in a smaller school context, providing the breadth of curriculum is more difficult. and having the expertise within your staff to cover that breadth of curriculum, PI provided that opportunity for schools to work together to provide that greater breadth of expertise for young people.
I'm sure, and we've looked actually at the STEM, the problems of STEM and measuring STEM, so that would be interesting actually to see, when your schools coming together, the critical mass to be able to delve into that. Just finally then around again, a point was made around the teacher experience, the development of teachers, the professional development. Just really, could you maybe expand upon that? Was there any quantitatively things looked at?
Again, it was mainly qualitative research that we were, because this was quite a small research evaluation. So it's anecdotally what the teachers have told us via interviews. PI provided a space for teachers to meet so that they could have curriculum planning, timetable planning, and resource and lesson planning time together, so they were able to, we're not supposed to use brainstorming anymore, thought shower, I think it currently is, thought shower ideas and share resources that they had with one another, so they were pulling ideas and that helped them with their professional development. So it was mainly at a planning level, and but they did. Some schools used their funding rather than focus their funding on the children. I don't mean this to sound selfish, but it was a different model. They used it for curriculum development of the teachers and professional development of the teachers. So training days and courses for teachers to go on, rather than away days for pupils. So that was a different model of.
If I could perhaps add, and it maybe links back to Danny's earlier question, one aspect of the programme that again we felt was absolutely critical was the work we did in terms of a bespoke programme to develop leadership skills with the principals. And we worked with our colleagues in the regional training unit in respect to this, and a very clearly defined programme, because as we know in any aspect of business or education or anything else, leadership is a critical factor. And in this case, certainly the leadership and the direction that added to the vision of principals and the capacity that was grown through that bespoke programme, which eventually by the end we were starting to drip down to teachers. Again, I think it's important to emphasise that in the development of such a process, in a sense 3 years is the blink of an eye. And we recognise the limitations of the time span, and we hope that, as I said earlier, that we have left a legacy in terms of things that are continuing, in terms of relationships that have been built. And I do know, if I pick again on in the teacher aspect of it, that now we find, and we've had some examples of this at presentation events, teachers from different schools who routinely work as a partnership, as a team. And that's a fantastic legacy. And if you're a teacher in an isolated rural situation, faced with the wealth of curriculum and assessment demands, to know that at least there's someone else to talk to even is very, very critical. So we've seen a lot of benefits there.
Sorry, just one more. Around the idea, and we maybe concentrated around, the religious or ethnic integration, how much focus was put on sort of socio-economic sharing and the coming together of, kids maybe from more affluent backgrounds and kids from poorer backgrounds?
That wasn't a focus of the project at all.
Okay.
But I think when you're dealing with such small schools,
Small
communities, there is a range of backgrounds there.
And an equivalent range within the two schools. Wouldn't be that diversity, really.
Thank you, Chair. And can I thank the members of the panel for coming along? I think if this had happened in East Belfast, my own constituency, I would be suffering the same obvious frustration of the chairman at the moment. Can I just ask you a few questions, or a few bits to the one question? And I think if I pick up on a word that Mr. Gilbert, I think, first used, and that was about that there were tangible benefits out of the programme, and then to pick up on Dr. Hunter's comments, and paragraph 42 of your paper indicates PI demonstrated that with sufficient drive and vision it is possible to challenge the norm and introduce new ideas even within the perceived traditional school setting. Maybe could you expand on that and what those new ideas were? And then to pick up on the very last phrase, which I think was used in response to Mr. Hazard's question, the legacy of, and maybe expand a bit more on that. I think one of the things that greatly annoys me in funding projects is the frustration that comes along at the end of the frustration of the project, and I've seen it on so many occasions in community and up into professional bodies. And have you created, or is there the potential to get over that frustration with all the good points that have come out of the project?
Do you want to pick up on the first?
I'll pick up on our recommendations, if I may. There is a natural deficit there when a project ends and the money runs out, and that would be one of our criticisms, is that we've had countless numbers of community relations projects that start and finish and leave a deficit within those communities then. And also there's an element of potential harm also, because goodwill, work and effort and relationships have been built up that when another new project comes along 5 years down the line, you know, how much do you want to get involved? So we can actually sometimes do more harm than good, and we would really encourage funding to be maintained for this type of work, so that that's not lost, because the project will change. Schools are committed to continuing the relationships they've built up, but their hands are tied in what they can facilitate without that funding, transport being a key issue. There are alternative technologies that we can use, but they're not a substitute for face-to-face contact. They can help to keep contact, video conferencing, for instance, and other forms of e-communication. In rural communities, you have an issue of connectivity with those kind of technologies, and as someone who has taught via video conferencing, it's not an easy or natural process. So in terms of shared classes, it can't work in that sense, but we would encourage schools to embrace that as helpful, but not a substitute for the face-to-face contact. So those are some of the issues that we have in terms of legacy, but there is will within those partnerships to continue.
If we just pick up on the will, I mean, the research indicated that the strongest will lay with the principals who had pushed this. Many of the teachers were also very committed. Some saw it as another project and its life was over. But clearly there are structures there. There is a will there. Many of the principals talked about money not being the crucial factor, but whether that can be sold to others in the school and the governors is another matter. So, you know, they're going to have to deflect resources from one direction to another to sustain this, I would have thought.
If I could perhaps pick up on a couple of aspects of your question, Mr. Newton. I think in terms of tangible benefits, we see them almost day and daily in terms of the ongoing relationship between principals in the same areas working together to the benefit of the children in that community. We've talked about the benefits to teachers in terms of partnerships that have developed that don't cost money and will continue to be there in addressing issues. I suppose also, and we did emphasise the whole community aspect of this, Mr and Mrs Bloggs and Mr and Mrs Jones, who walk down the street in Village X, who suddenly know each other and talk, they will not stop talking because the money has dried up, and we hope that that will be something that's a long, long legacy of this. And finally, I suppose, and this is a strategic point, that our great hope in many ways, and we do sincerely thank you for the opportunity to present today, because it's an opportunity to demonstrate the potential benefits, and hopefully through your own good officers and other officers to perhaps influence policy as we move forward. Because in many ways, this, in a kind of an elongated way, you could almost describe as a kind of a pilot. And hopefully one of the key things that we have as a part of our developing education system is using the learning to grow policy into the future. And I think what's emerging from this process, we hope will influence people in terms of how they think about this core aspect of developing our community in Northern Ireland, and that is our young people living and working together. And even recently I was very struck by some media pieces that were done around where young people are at in respect to our broader issues in Northern Ireland. And for those of us who are of perhaps an older age, a recognition that young people see things through a different pair of glasses is very stark, very stark.
Chair, the Chair had referred to other initiatives of a similar nature. How would, how would you feel that I would benchmark against other initiatives of a similar nature on a value for money or an outcome-based evaluation?
I don't know if I could answer that.
As a project on a relatively small scale, addressing areas and schools which are often neglected in this sort of process, given the professional development and the inroads into better community relations, I think it's a project that has achieved a lot. If you're measuring it against projects which have taken cross-community contact as their total focus and have worked in that field, then I don't think it's like with like. I think it depends where you're starting from, and this was a project that was broad-based about enhancing pupil experience, enhancing professional experience, and I think as that exists, it's a very interesting experiment in bringing together that whole that educational experience holistically, both the professional development and the community relations aspect.
Thank you, Chair.
John?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for your report today, and I must congratulate you on it. And I sense the frustration in Dr. Hunter's voice there. But one of the, I think there's been much said here, but the phrase that really strikes home to me today, and it's somebody who was involved in EMU 30 years ago, it was made by Mr. Gilbert there. It was a strong, sustainable partnerships, but maintaining the ethos of the individual schools. This sort of work ticks so many boxes. It ticks the box. I don't even know if there's a question, not a question even in this. It ticks so many of the boxes in terms of building that inclusive society. It does, in my mind, on Chris's point, it does raise standards because it gives young people the educational opportunities. We visited Scotland and we looked at particularly the STEM, where you had a particular, in one school you had a science expert, and it was able to get that out. But in terms of building that inclusive society, with our children, coming together, with the teachers working together, with the parents coming, it might be a Christmas production in the church hall and whatever else, but it's actually, and you made this point very well too, it's actually bringing our communities along at their pace, and that is so important in Northern Ireland. Different communities move at different paces. One of the first experience of EMU was, as I said, was when a school from near enough Mervyn's constituency, and I from South Down linked up to doing outdoor pursuits on the morns. But so those things are coming along, and what really gets me here, and the word learning was used, and the word strategic was used, and it relates to a point made by the chair earlier in terms of really the lack of a strategic approach here, because to me, like other initiatives, like Achieving Belfast, Achieving Derry, surely to move things on, there has to be dissemination of good practice. And rather than seeing this project as a 2 or 3 year project that is part of a long-term, and hopefully maybe within shared education, that's where it fits, within that, having a long strategic approach. But, you know, your evaluation, it's only going to be useful if it begins to move shared education onwards. And we can't be reinventing the wheel with another wee project in 2 or 3 years' time, whatever. Obviously, North East Education Library Board, the people involved in this are at a different stage in the development as other boards would be if this was rolled out and whatever. And I suppose, Chair, really it's just not a strategic approach from the Department of Education. It has to be a strategic approach from the executive, from OFM, DFM, in terms of, I really would hope that they would take on the learning from this here and begin to roll this out across the province. I haven't got a question, but as I say, that's my frustrations. Frustrations are there with you, and maybe I suppose maybe as a committee, we should be writing to OFM, DFM to see is this going to ensure that this is really the starting point for moving shared education on. And I'll go back to the phrase you point out at the beginning, building that sustainable partnership, but maintaining the ethos of our individual school. Do you see that's fundamental? And thank you again.
Chair, if I can just a brief comment. In terms of the broader sustainability and learning, I did refer briefly, and just again briefly to refer to the resources that were produced. And Jane has also referred to the documentation around how to build a sustainable partnership, and the internet TV channel resources that are available. So part of the legacy here, we hope, is that if others are picking up and learning on this, are tools that will enable them to do it without the project, without the funding, which capture the real journey. And these have been built and informed very much by the experience of those who were doing it, not someone sitting at a distance from it. And we feel certainly that, if a couple of principals in some other part of the province, and I would recognise and pay due regard and respect to other things that are happening in other boards, and we're not in any way trying to say somehow or other we're ahead here. This is simply what we did, and we're simply sharing that with you. But the resources that are there available in a sense for all time, we hope will have an impact, and that was part of our sustainability strategy.
Just one more point to add to that. It ticks all the boxes. We're talking earlier about area-based planning. We're talking about sustaining rural communities. We can't sustain rural communities if we haven't got any schools in our rural communities. And this is all integral to that.
I think if you look at shared education, the point you're making, Sean, in relation to the joined up, my frustration is the department has set out what they see as it was the definition of shared education provided by the Ministerial Advisory Group or provided to them. Now, if you read this in context of POWI, it involves 2 or more schools of other education institutions from different sectors working in collaboration with the aim of delivering educational benefits to learners, promoting equality of opportunity, good relations, equality of identity, respect for diversity and community cohesion, POWI. But project ended, and the department then comes out with an announcement back in a few weeks ago, 10th of January, at the beginning of the new year. The Minister launches Shared Education Campus Programme. You have to have all your applications in by March, by the 31st of March, and unless it's capital, you're not getting any money. Now, and I think there is an issue for this committee to ask urgently the department to consider the funding of POWI because if they don't get 10, because they look at these 10 shared campuses, well, I think we all know There's possibly 3 of them. There's one of them ready to hit a train wreck, I think, but that's only a personal view, and the others are all some at different stages. So there's going to be money there. It's not going to be able to be all spent. Here's a project that is delivering, could deliver. Are we able to help and assist to try and get it back on track? And I think that if that was the outcome of this meeting and this discussion today, I think that would be a very good day. But the first worthwhile day's work I've done up here for a year or 2. So I think that...
Can we quit you on that?
well, what you didn't know was I was giving every one of you, I was including you in that, because it's a collective worthwhile, so don't think that you've done anything better. You know.
I'm not saying I have.
So I think that is clearly the issue that we need to focus in on, and that would help to alleviate some of our frustrations. Dana, you wanted to...
I just want to, we didn't really explore governors in that. I imagine within that, you know, sometimes we talk about in the future of schools federations and working together, but within that there must have been something similar in getting the governors of both schools to work, and we're learning from that.
Maybe let Jane use the example of how governors work together in respect to the shared teacher, which is a good illustrative example of a broader picture.
In terms of the appointment of shared teacher, the 2 schools would have formulated a subcommittee of governors with representatives from each school. That subcommittee then took forward the appointment process. We did also develop throughout the project guidance for governors on the appointment of a shared teacher. We also had a resource in relation to guidance for managing a shared teacher. But taking Aideen's point, that's certainly something that could be built upon. But I think what it proved was where there was a very particular task and focus for governors, then they came together, they worked very well together, and the key focus for governors being to improve and to enhance the education for the children in their schools. And governors were very committed to that work and worked together very productively.
And I think just to add briefly to that, referring to a point I made earlier, in these small rural communities, members of the community who get to know each other, surprise, surprise, are very often governors. In the normal day-to-day life, because in small communities governors play a much larger proportion of the community, and what we have seen, albeit not measurable and tangible in traditional senses, is how those community-based relationships working through governors in different schools from a different ethos have actually impacted on bringing the community together. So that's another benefit that we've seen.
Can I thank you very much for your time, for the work that has been put in relation to the PI project. Congratulations to all involved. I think you can pick up from the tone of the comments made at the table today that the committee are very supportive of trying to see how we could use. We will forward all the information to the department and ask them for their comment, but specifically ask them in relation to how we can secure funding within the shared education structure to enable it to be re-established. Thank you very much in the meantime. Thank you.
Also write to FMD-FM as well.
And yes, and I think we should write to FMD-FM as well. So it follows on from the point that Sean made. Thank you.
That's the question.
Correspondence members, and we want to, if we can, bring these things to a conclusion, because I'm really worried that we are losing quorum, and there's a couple of things we just want to conclude with. Correspondence page 227 to 376. We have 12 items provided under correspondence and 2 tabled items. At page 283, you will see a response from the Department following queries raised after the briefing of the Department's business plan. It's been suggested that we write again to seek a fuller response in respect of parental interaction with preschool allocation process. However, a link with further information has been provided, and I suggest that we'd ask the clerk to summarise this for us for next week's meeting. Okay. Page 371, See a response from the Western Education Library Board following the committee's queries arising from the board's annual report. And I would suggest that we would write again to the board to seek further detail on the demographic changes, related financial pressures and the need to rationalise post-primary provision. Agreed? And then the only other one I had was 373, correspondence from the Northern Ireland Commission for Catholic Education responding to outstanding committee query on issues previously raised by the Coalition for Marriage. And the complete response was accidentally omitted from the pack, so the full response from NICE is included in your table papers. And if we're content, we'll just note that correspondence. Also, on tabled items, we have a response from ETI Committee indicating that its Deputy Chairperson will attend the STEM School event, and we're quite happy that that's the case. Okay, any other? We'll dispose of the other correspondence as the covering sheet at pages 224 to 225. Danny?
This was on the first one, which was the invitation to the ATL conference. I actually replied to that when I got it because it clashes with the election, which is the same day.
Well, as I have
quite
no
important.
pecuniary interest in that the election, I'm neither standing for council nor the European seat. Maybe, John.
But you might be helping colleagues.
All right. Well, that would be it. Right. That would be a new thing. Okay, noted. So I don't think anybody's going then. I don't see anybody else sort of putting their hand up and saying, "Oh, well, I'll go." Okay. I would like to see you go to the hop with that one and say, any chance? Was there something else, Danny?
No,
Nope.
no, thank you.
Okay, the third work programme members. Sorry, Sean.
It's obvious that we have very much of STEM always on our agenda, and it's good to see. I must acknowledge the STEM reports there, you know. But it goes back to my earlier point too about this strategic approach. You know, it's okay having a little project for a couple of years, STEM in primary schools or whatever else, but where does this fit into the overall agenda of that strategic approach to STEM, or strategic approach to anything? You know?
Thank you. Yes, Chris.
How many years is it since the world around us was created and that's been bedded in? How long has it been since that change was made?
That, if I'm right, was brought in along with the revised curriculum, which was 2007. Is that right? So my understanding is that the department is currently considering a review of the revised curriculum. So that would include that. And there clearly is. Now, if we want, we can specifically again, but we did get correspondence back from the department in relation to the STEM issue, which covered the issue of the world around, isn't that right?
I think, Chair, we're coming to this probably after the meeting. So we have our STEM is Cool event next week. I've just another further out forward work programme which schedules in some STEM briefings. Then members may want to do more with it.
Yeah. Okay, can we just say in relation to the forward work programme, which is pages 378 to 380, our informal briefing with the district inspectors takes place tomorrow evening in room 115 at 6 p.m. Light refreshments will be available and committee staff will be at each table to take notes in the during the discussion. Thank you to all those who have advised the clerk of their availability to attend, and the committee staff have tabled a members' pack for the event, which is in front of you. Clerk has asked that we try something slightly different tomorrow evening. Usually we nominate rapporteurs who moderate the discussion at each of the tables and then provide the feedback. Suggest at this time that members facilitate the discussion and provide feedback as necessary. That might scare the life out of the district inspector, so I think it's a good idea. And there are three tables and the district inspector's event, and we therefore require 3 members to volunteer. Myself and the deputy chair are happy to facilitate discussions and to feedback. We therefore actually only need 1. However, I'm more than happy if somebody else wants to do that. I'm not precious about doing that particular role. If members come and there even wants to be 2 members at the table, you know, I don't think, you know, we'll just confine ourselves to it just being 1 individual. So I think maybe the better way of doing it is see the number of members that arrive. If there's 3 tables, then we'll divide ourselves so that because there's always a risk, and there's a risk when members go to the table. we direct it in a certain way. I want to hear from them what are the issues as much as us try to. So are you happy enough with that as an approach? Can I also remind members that there will not be a committee meeting on the 29th, as we're hosting the STEM is Cool event in the Lawn Gallery with the Northern Ireland Science Park. You'll find an updated agenda at page 382 and the invitation list at page 384. And can the members please advise the clerk about their availability to attend? The clerk has also tabled a draft press release to our STEM is Cool event, and if we're content to endorse the draft subject of with the agreement of the members, then we would release accordingly.
Sorry, Chair, I misworded your brief there.
Yeah, that's all right. But
it is. It's the last thing in the tabled items.
I bluffed my way around it.
Well done.
As I normally do.
And yes, it's just a draft press release for our STEM is Cool event. Hopefully members will find it uncontroversial. It's the very last thing in table items. And I've attributed some comments to some of the other chairs of the other committees participating. They'll feedback if they're happy. So hopefully the committee is content for that to be issued on the day.
Okay, happy enough? Hold on to this, I think. Any other business? Okay, now just before members all disappear, the next meeting will be scheduled for the 5th of February, 10 a.m. in the Senate chamber. Okay, thank you. Right, okay.
Yesterday, the APG on learning disability, there was a very compelling presentation by two mothers who had their children had a learning disability and they were excluded from school. I suppose really what I'm asking that this committee should be writing to the department to find what help and support is there for the schools and for the parents of these children in terms of the provision of an enriched learning environment for them. You know, I think they made it. I think one phrase that really came home to me. One parent said, "If my child was in a wheelchair, they'd be looked after in a special way. They wouldn't be asked to get out of the wheelchair and sort of conform with the normal curriculum. But if my child has particular severe learning difficulties and is not in a wheelchair, it can be an issue."
How would you? Yep. Yes, Chris.
Unfortunately, I couldn't be there yesterday, but at the last meeting, even there was a point where we could be fed in this too. Was there was a recollection? A young woman was telling that she wanted to select a particular career. I can't remember what it was. It was social work or something. And the career's advice was, "You have special needs. That's not open to you. You can't do that. Pick something else." And it was alarming. Like, it was more not a case of this. Let's see what support we can get so that you can achieve what you want to achieve. It was, no, you can't do that. So I thought that, again, that was quite alarming. And if that can be fed into that, whatever we're trying to look for around support.
Robin.
Sure. Just on the same lines, I raised it in the chamber when we were having the debate around special needs, children with special needs. And I know it's a very wide subject, but I do get the impression that one of the parents who came to me was just totally frustrated that she did not feel that her child was getting, I'll use the expression, a fair crack of the whip.
That's it.
And indeed that she put a number of questions, and I raised those questions in the chamber. And I do believe schools themselves try their best. I'm sure they do. I'm sure the principal and I'm sure the teachers do try their best. But underneath it all, Chair, I do believe there is a level of frustration with parents who see, as was described to me, intermittent help with the child. And it goes for 6 weeks, and then it breaks. And then there's maybe a different emphasis for 6 weeks, it breaks. And there doesn't seem, Chair, to be the level of support that we might expect for children. I think the physical need of a child can be much more easily accommodated and is much more easily accommodated than the child who is suffering from mental health problems.
I think it does go into the whole area, and I know Sean and I have had discussions about sometimes a very practical case where there are issues, and I think that we would, if we get some information back, it would be helpful. Okay. Thank you. Members, we'll just bring this to a conclusion, and then if I can just have your attention for 5 minutes before you all disappear. Peter has